I'm Lorraine Blaine. Everybody calls me Rain. I am the space track director of DragonCon. DragonCon is a very large, popular cultural convention, and it has a whole section of what we call reality tracks, of which, as I said, I run the space track, and we have the gentleman here, Drew Myers, who also runs the science track. In complete honesty here, I do not have a science background. I do not work in the science industry. I am just your very typical layman's space freak. That's how I met Les. I bring him into DragonCon every year. I love this stuff. Yes. It fascinates me, and I want to do everything I can to try and keep it going, keep the interest out there. I want to see it back in schools. You know, I want to be one of those people out there. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. I know that, but that's why I'm here, and I appreciate Les bringing me here.
All right. I think these other two gentlemen you already know, having heard them today. Now, I'm going to start things off by saying, having given this all due consideration, and being both a scientist, specifically an astronomer, and also being a licensed minister, which means I have the dubious distinction of being able to be stoned as a heretic on both sides. I'm going to take a stand regarding what I believe to be the true answer to the Fermi Paradox. I believe we're quarantined. For whatever reason, whether scientific, whether technological, whether theological, whatever reason we choose, I believe we have been quarantined. I think there are advanced civilizations out there. I just think they don't want us to know about it yet.
I also believe that there are lots of civilizations out there. My biggest belief is we do not hear from them simply due to scale. There is the vastness of our universe, the vastness of our galaxy. We've heard over and over again today, just the vastness of the time to get to our nearest star, which, you know, it's very easy to say, oh, it's just, you know, 4 light years away. Well, then you have to think of what a light year is. I think that is also compounded by the fact that I believe there are so many types of life and so many different ways for life to develop. In the last panel, we were just talking, somebody mentioned the extremophiles. I've worked on some projects that went and they were looking at the extremophiles found in geothermal vents. And there is a good scientific population that believes that life actually began coming out of those geothermal vents, you know, and not in the soupy broth that a lot of people talk about. So I think that if you look, that's a possibility. I think, you know, the soup broth is a possibility. I think that the different types of life are not necessarily going to be humanoid. I think our brains have such capacities that we don't even know about at this point, that there are alien civilizations out there that would never have a need for the technological that we'd be looking for in how they communicate. So I think that there are basically 2 main reasons why we haven't heard, and that's what they would be, but I do believe that there are.
So I'm a little skeptical of the zoo hypothesis because that would require tremendous discipline on the part of all the aliens not to do anything that we might notice. So it's sort of like conspiracy theories, and that, you know, the ones that rely on people keeping a secret, right, and doing it competently. When have you ever known, you know, one or the other?
They really are out.
Well, the sign of a well-adjusted paranoid is, you know, they are out to get you, but it's nothing personal. I tend to, if there is a Fermi paradox, because I don't think we've been looking long enough yet because of scale, but I think the answer would tend to be in the they are too alien, because we are much too arrogant about what constitutes consciousness and what constitutes life. And if you just look at the attitude of Europeans, how it has shifted in just the last century toward our fellow human beings. About, for instance, the franchise for women is an example. You know, Switzerland didn't give women the right to vote until 1971. 1971. I've got a car that was built in 1971. Okay? So this business of extremophiles goes to the point that as time goes on, it seems life wants to exist and be everywhere we look for it. So far, we've found it. And I suspect there's a lot of life, and it evolved from the inside out. And the great thing about being in space science is, well, I mean, I don't work in it. I'm just kind of, but they chuck the textbook out the window about every 5 years. Somebody discovers something, and you know, how many other fields change that fast? So for instance, what I would use as an analogy for life, it may be too alien. I saw once, about 10 years ago, a time-lapse photo of a forest that had been taken over an entire year, and each shutter click was about an hour apart, an hour or two apart. And somebody made a movie of this. And when you sped up the movie to play in a minute or two, you saw the trees dancing, all right? But in our time frame, experiencing a day that's, you know, 86,000 seconds long, you know, trees look slow and static. But if you live in a different time frame, they become almost like animals. And I think that's what it is that we are not humble enough to recognize other forms of existence yet, but we're working on it. So I think the answer is more there.
Well, first of all, I would like to tell you that Dr. Jill Tarter, who is known, I guess, everywhere in the United States, she has been, and she is the leader of the SETI program at the SETI Institute. Well, she thinks more or less like you. I'm glad to say so because I have been working with her for 20 years. I am just a mathematical physicist and not an experimental radio astronomer, but I have been in touch with the SETI Institute for 20 years because there is only one worldwide organization considering SETI a respectable science. And this is the IAA, the International Academy of Astronautics, that has a special group called the SETI Permanent Study Group or SETI Committee, the name changed over the years, that includes about 50 scientists from all over the world that are real SETI experts. And Jill Tarter was the chair of this group for many years. So I came to know practically all of them since Frank Drake up to now to Seth Shostak and so on. Now, Jill's opinion is precisely that we did not get in touch so far with any extraterrestrial civilization in the galaxy, quite simply because our radio telescopes are not powerful enough to get signals from distances, roughly speaking, beyond 200 or 300 light years. And you immediately realize that 300 light years away is a very small distance compared to the size of the galaxy, which is 100,000 light years. So, in Jill's opinion, this is the #1 reason why SETI, quote, failed. SETI did not fail. Simply, our technology is not yet advanced enough, and we also did not observe for long periods of time to get in touch. Incidentally, this is what Jill has been fighting for, because let me tell you something from the technical point of view. When the NASA program started, there were basically two different kinds of search. An all-sky surveys done in the Mojave Desert with the 70 meters deep space network antenna, looking or intending to look at the whole sky with a lower sensitivity. And then there was another program intended to go on at the Arecibo radio telescope. That was called the targeted search on 778 stars of the same type as the Sun, that is G2 in spectral type, with a better sensitivity. Now, unfortunately, as it was just described correctly by you, neither of this program became reality, because within 1 year from the opening of the NASA program, everything was shut down by Congress. So the conclusion is that Jill is firm on that. She initially tried to spend 10 years working around on radio telescopes all over the world, and this is how it could meter Nancy, the French radio telescope south of that. Then she decided that, you know, buying telescope time was expensive and also false. It was a waste of time because the telescope time was too short for the needs she had. So she decided to go over and create her own radio telescope, which is what today we call the ATA, the Allen Telescope Array. Allen, the rich person, was going to finance that. Unfortunately, at the moment, there are only 42 antennas out of the 350 initially planned. So in technical terms, this means that the collecting area, that is the surface of the sum of these 42 dishes, is equivalent to a 30-meter dish. And this again is not powerful enough to pick up signals from 100 years or later.
All right, I'm going to throw something out for all three of you. And anybody out there who wants to pipe up. So far, we're approaching it from the standpoint of us making contact with them. Why, given the idea of the generation shifts, the arcs, and the 10 light-year jumps, etc., why haven't they contacted us?
Why should they? Very honestly, seriously, if you say that we have had signals out there for, what, 80 years? Seriously? It's very possible that any civilization that might have been looking already went by. You know, if they're in their generational shift, if they're going someplace. Two, you know, our signals, as I understand it, they disperse. So when you get out that far, it's not going to be that strong. We don't repeat exactly the same way.
Why do they need to have heard us? Why haven't they come looking for a planet to colonize within our solar system?
Because we're looking for us.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, there are likely hundreds and hundreds of solar systems out there. We are just one little speck of one.
Yeah, now in
One of the
19...
problems is that those last two factors of the great equation are just awful. There is absolutely no way to put very good error bars on. The argument goes that if there are so many civilizations, there should be at least one typical one like us. But that means that it's not typical like us as we are now. It means it's typical like we would be if we were starfaring. And what we would be like as a civilization when we're starfaring, you cannot predict. In fact, I have a issue that starflight will be available in 200 years. I think it's going to be more than 5 or 1,000. And you try to predict the policies and whatever would be the mode of contact in 500 years for us, that probably has, if there was a differential equation that could predict it, it probably has a Lyapunov coefficient that's so big that from our initial conditions that there's just nothing you can say about it.
Okay, in 1985, a rather famous radio astronomer, Mike Papagiannis, and Claudia might have met him, I never did, predicted that an ideal place to look for them, to look for aliens, would be in our own Kuiper belt. Because There's bodies there with plenty of volatiles, you still have sufficient solar energy, and if they don't want to deal with us, they could build a Dyson sphere, a Dyson dot, and have nothing to do with us at all, and we have trouble detecting them. A few years ago with Tony Martin, who used to edit the JBIS, and was one of the directors of Project Gabrielus, we investigated the spectral signature of organically inhabited space habitats within the Kuiper belt. And then we realized it'd be an infrared excess. We worked this out, it's in 2 papers in JBIS. But all we could do observationally today is look at the largest of the Kuiper belt objects. If they choose to live or build show worlds in 10-kilometer or 20-kilometer objects, we simply couldn't detect them. Our own solar system is a huge place.
So then we come back to the idea that we're quarantined because they don't want to talk to
Right,
us.
right. But maybe the word quarantine is too strong. Maybe they just want nothing to do. And instead, we don't quarantine termites or ants, but we don't talk to them because we have very little in common. And this may be what it is. They may be sharing our solar system and have see nothing at all in common with us primitives.
I see no reason that all of the answers to the Fermi Paradox and one's not listed are not the case. Because if you have multiple life that's developing in the universe, they all could have different reasons for not contacting us. And you take, for example, you're talking about the throwing stones from the different sides. You take example from, the Christian, Jewish perspective of having angels. Well, that's another life form besides humans, so I don't see a conflict there. And so if you take even that perspective too, you think of probably a life form that's more advanced than us. Who's to say that there isn't someone out there protecting us from other life forms who have more malicious means? So there are many, many different answers to this question, and I don't think it lies in one or even two. I think it lies in every single one of those that is up there and ones we haven't thought of. And I do think that that life is developed in different environments and all different forms. There are ideas and theories that's been around in humanity for a long time that there is life that was developed here that was catalyzed by life elsewhere that was completely different forms than us. So if you take, for instance, like say Venus. Venus to us is completely uninhabitable. But what if it wasn't for some other type of life form? We could have life right next to us and not even know it because we just haven't woken up and we didn't realize it.
Let me toss something else out. How many of you are familiar with the ongoing experiments in cephalopod intelligence? Octopods, squid, cuttlefish.
People use it.
Octopi, I've talked with the keepers of aquaria, and octopi require changes to their environment periodically. They require intellectual stimulation. They require toys. And they require those toys to be changed out periodically because they get bored with them. There is every indication that octopi have extremely high intelligence. The problem is they are so different from us, we don't know how to measure it. We don't even know how to communicate with them.
And that's exactly what I was saying.
Who is saying, I am throwing everything
No, I
out
understand.
there. Who is for considering that maybe they're already here? And we're just classifying them as another species.
At that point, I would say.
He's shaking his head going,
I would say we've got and that's the thing with our role was first getting started, because we can trace their genetics all the way through. But going back a step to what we were saying before, and Robert, this tags along with you, I think part of this whole where are they, again, is our own arrogance. We expect that they should want to come find us. We're here. Why don't they come find us? Who are we to come and be found? We are one very, very tiny microscopic something in the vast universe of who knows how many, but maybe thousands, maybe millions, maybe billions. Why would they want to come find us when, you know?
There's one thing that
And
science
that was one point. Yeah.
teaches us over and over again for this duration of this Renaissance civilization. It's the need to be humble, because every couple of decades something comes along that some people say knocks us down a peg or two. Actually, I don't think we are masters of the universe, but
Not well.
I don't consider it being knocked down a peg or two, but you know, to proud, arrogant people, it's a come down again and again and again and again. And science teaches us the way to deal with the world is to be humble about what you know. Be humble about what you think you know. I mean, that's a basic historical lesson of science.
Yes, now this actually ties off of both of the comments there. We have had radio communications for not even 2 centuries, essentially.
Correct.
We're like somebody who has just arrived at the prom and is mad because no one has asked us out onto the dance floor yet. And we've just been there 15 minutes. But it goes back to pride. You know, we think we're important, we're here, show up. But if you look at human history, you just look at the history of metallurgy. We've barely been sending signals out of any strength for a fairly short period of time. And get so anxious because nobody has called back yet. Reminds me of a teenager trying to get a date at the prom.
Now, I can't make an estimate of absolute probability, but let me make a couple of statements of conditional probability. Dr. Lightfoot said we couldn't speculate about what a star-faring civilization might be like 1,000 years from now.
Well, we can speculate, but have no grounding, actually.
Okay. I happen to, and it's no more than a suspicion, I think we actually have kind of a narrow window for this society, this culture that we are in. We have a narrow window to get off the planet into a more resource-rich mode. I know this is one of Les's big issues for a way to solve our resource crisis and to get through. You know, what we're going through now, green energy is my day job. And I tell people, you know, they say, you're all interested in space, you know, why are you doing green energy? Well, it's too late for me to get a career at NASA. So I do green energy to help buy this culture some time to solve its resource problems. Once we do, the future is open to us. But, you know, we have to get through this rough patch. I think if we don't do it in the next 100 years or so, we will never do it.
I agree.
And I think that's another
That's-
part of the paradox. A lot of people don't consider the L.
Now that's a
That
conditional
length of
probability.
time. I honestly don't think that, you know, in science fiction that we've all read, you hear about these civilizations that have gone out and they've lasted for however long. I mean, it's always long periods of time. I don't actually think that civilizations probably do last huge amounts of time. Maybe they do get out into the galaxy and it's wonderful to think about, but I don't think that they last hundreds of thousands of years.
Jim.
Well, as Frank, I think, said earlier, back in the days of the Cold War, when Drake was first looking on the equation, people were afraid that L could be as small as 50 years. And I'm reminded of Stanley Schmidt's contingent in 93, that really is the fear that whatever happens as a society, everybody as a whole, however well we get along together, no civilization is going to last past the point where one lone nut can blow up the 100-kilogram antimatter generator or unleash the biological bug or create some other
Or simply
society.
start canceling enough programs to where we no longer have the opportunity to get out there.
You know.
Had a hand over here, I think behind you.
Thank you.
Hand is up first.
So, let's see. At the risk of seeming arrogant, and I hope I don't, I think that, let's look at ourselves, right? We as a society would like to think or treat others as we would like to be treated ourselves, right? It's the golden rule, but it's also something that most of us kind of practice. So, from the
Some
point
not
of,
as well as others, but yeah.
from the point of view of being out there, right? Imagine that we would discover. Wouldn't we just suddenly go put all of our resources to make that contact, right? So I think the most reasonable way forward is to look at it mathematically, statistically, and that is where the scale comes into play, right? Because mathematically, the most supported path is the fact that we're too far apart. The other thing is, look at our own development, right? We are now conscious, we are now communicating, we have created, there's no other life on our planet, save us, that has this level of sophistication, right? Maybe that's being arrogant. I don't think the octopus is as intelligent as we are, because if he was, then he would be trying to communicate with us and making successful elements. The dolphins, they can be trained, the dogs can, but still it doesn't rise to the level that we have, which may be arrogant, but it's a fact. So, if there is another civilization, the most likely result is that that civilization is approximately of the same technological capability as we are. You don't think so?
I don't think so, because one of the things that the arguments that I've heard so far today have not taken into consideration is time. Everybody talks about space, the distance between stars, etc. Nobody talks about the age of the universe.
But the age of the universe, we arrived, right? Other civilizations would have had to arrive millions of years before us to get to at the same level in order for them to...
And there are stars out there with planets in the Goldilocks zone.
Sure.
Those stars are much
Older than ours.
longer lived and much older than our sun. So there is absolutely no reason why such an advanced civilization could not have developed. And there is absolutely no reason why they could not have already begun colonization centuries, millennia ago. Finished colonization. So, where are they?
Okay, so...
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think deep time is often ignored in this discussion. You know, we're used to thinking about the 1AU being 1 foot and the nearest star 47 miles away, and we get caught up in 100,000 light years.
Right.
All these other things, and we forget about deep time, and Ken's point about how long it would take, and which that same thought process is what Fermi supposedly went through.
Exactly.
But I wrote an essay recently and for Bain, and I had a lot of discussions with a biologist in our neighborhood about evolution. And I think we also tend to, somebody this morning pointed out, we have this false notion of evolution pointing up. And there are a lot of things that are necessary for civilization, an intelligent tool using civilization that we think, you know, are great that are going to happen with evolution. But evolution is unguided. Dinosaurs were an incredibly successful species that never had to develop the technology and tool using. And there seem to be at least three things that are totally unrelated from appearance in terms of evolutionary pressures that drove them that we have that may be pretty rare. is sentience, tool use, manipulate the environment with our digits, and communication. And dolphins might be the most intelligent creatures on the planet, but without the ability to manipulate their environment and swimming in the ocean, they're not going to have fire. They're not going to build steel and all these other things. And they may be really smart swimming out there and have solved the problems that we need to have solved, but never be able to communicate with us, right? So when you roll all these things together, my assertion is, at this time, we're probably alone in the right. That's what I believe. I think we're probably alone.
Just a thought. I was thinking about why we haven't been noticed beyond our solar system, and that's one thing. Thinking about the propagation of radio waves. I mean, for the last 60 years, we've only had, well, maybe the last 80 years, we've only had broadcasting at all, and almost everything below, say, 50 megahertz is either absorbed or reflected by the atmosphere, and only the VHF and UHF communications and broadcasting can hopefully go beyond the Earth's atmosphere. So, and most of that is internally directed type of activity, so it may be that we're just you might say like white noise on their oscilloscope screen. I mean, we're just,
But once again, we're being anthropocentric in our thinking. We're assuming that they're out there looking for us. We may not be what they're looking for at all. They may be out there looking for resources. They may be looking for other worlds to colonize. Okay? But according to Fermi, they should still already have stumbled across us. Yeah, over here in the blue shirt.
Yeah, I think we're just getting in too big of a hurry. I mean, stop and think about it. If we've been pumping out, strong radio waves for 80 years, I mean, the soonest anybody could have gotten the message and got back to us was like 40 years ago, which is 40 light years away. I mean, that's a pretty small bubble. It's like, what are the chances of another intelligent, civilization in our galaxy being that close? Even if they are listening. There's just no chance.
We still get back to the point of why should they be looking for us? Why aren't they looking for planets to colonize? And if we have the possibility of civilizations this old, they should already have gotten here by now. Over here, yes. They're there.
If you're a member of an advanced interstellar society or civilization, why would you want to colonize planets? Why do you even assume that you're still biological at that point?
That is one of the possible solutions to the paradox.
Hans Moravec says that. He says people become robots. He calls them our mind children, and thinks in less than 100 years. It's kind of a Werner Vinge type argument about singularity. That people download themselves into machines.
Yeah.
That's what our immortality will be.
Figure out the hardware, the software, you move from platform to platform.
Let me tell you about the opinion of Stephen Dick, who was the NASA chief historian until recently when he retired. Now, Stephen Dick has written very good books, and I strongly suggest that you read them. Now, being the chief historian, he knows from human history that finding two civilizations on Earth that are exactly at the same level of development is very unlikely. So if this is already true for Earth, you can imagine in the galaxy, taking into account the lifespan of stars, which differs by millions or billions of years. Now, in mathematical terms, the probability of finding two civilizations exactly at the same level of the Earth is 0. And since we are the newcomers, because we just started 50 years ago, to think and to explore a little, this means that if someone else is there, they must be much more advanced than us, statistically. So this is the first point. Now let me tell you the next step that Stephen Dick has been preaching around in conferences where we discussed about it. Well, the next step he calls the post-biological universe, meaning that we are made of flesh, and there is a famous science fiction story about that, right? I'm sure that most of you know it. But what is the next stage beyond flesh? Well, the next stage is artificial intelligence. And so the point he is making is that probably there are other civilizations that went already beyond the singularity. We cannot understand what possibly they can be. And anyway, if this civilization exists, they are so much more advanced than us that simply they don't care at all about us. Just as we don't care at all about the ants that are outside in the field. We live on the same planet, but there are 400 million years difference in evolution, and that is the explanation.
Exactly. I was kind of hesitant to bring that up. I think if there's been advanced civilizations around for billions of years longer than us, maybe their attitude towards us is kind of like us towards, another strain of bacteria similar to one we've seen a million times before.
But that still doesn't mean we wouldn't have encountered them. Yes.
I agree with Al. I think he nailed it. We're looking for us, and I think in our heart of hearts, that's what we're looking for in terms of life. We're out searching for exoplanets that resemble Earth because we think that's what life should be, okay? Now, for the uninitiated as a radio operator, if somebody were to turn on a shortwave radio, you'd hear all kinds of signals and carriers and bands and all kinds of stuff there that they wouldn't understand because they don't know what it is. They can't interpret it. Maybe all of this white noise and what we're calling interference is communications between higher species. Why are they looking for us? We're the low end of the totem pole. Maybe they're out there talking to each other and we don't know how to interpret that.
I'd like to present a point that might be seen as a bit heretical. I know of two individuals, very active, very successful in science. One's a mathematician, one is a propulsion physicist. Claudio knows one of them also. And they both will swear to the fact that they've had contact near abductee experiences. It is not only flaky people who report this. It is sometimes professional people who have made great contributions. And it is within the realm of possibility, at least, that we have been contacted, that they play around with us now and then. You probably, I will tell you later who I mean. If I mention his name in public, he would kill me, okay? You know him. I think we have to take that in as at least anecdotal evidence that it is not impossible that they're all around us. And maybe they've been reported in the past as leprechauns, as elves, as the footprints of Satan. Now we think of aliens, but they might have had other explanations 1,000 or 2,000 years ago.
We've
5
got a
minutes
gentleman
left,
over here that has not spoken up the whole conference. He gets a chance to ask a question.
Okay, getting back to sort of your point with the white noise. Let's go back to what is SETI looking for, like a repeatable signal, basically. But if you assume that there are civilization and they're talking to each other on an interstellar basis, it's probably expensive to communicate over that kind of range. Why would they use repeatable signals? Information technology would be your maximum amount of information density is an encoded signal that looks pretty random, basically a zip file essentially. And if we don't know the format, why and it would not appear like a repeating signal. Can you guys discuss that?
I think.
Right, so it would appear effectively random for maximum information content, and that's what you would want if it's very expensive to communicate.
I think SETI has just always said, if somebody is trying to contact us, they would use this repeating signal over a long period of time, hoping that you get it. But again, that goes back to, is somebody trying to contact us, why would they try to contact us?
And they would, and I accept the physical argument about using the water hole because it's so darn convenient if you have a biology like us. Speaking of format issues, nobody's running a CD search in smoke signals or or stentor shouting networks, or pheromones. All right, I mean, maybe the reason the ants don't look smart is because we're not really looking at pheromone. You know, it gets back to the issue of humility and the format. You know, we're not looking broadly enough.
We are looking human-centered.
Let's just take one example of, say there are some life out there that's a little more advanced than us, and they come here and they look at us, and maybe let's just assume that they're good and peaceful, and they just come here out of curiosity, they just want to make contact. But then they look at us and they see how we're busy warring with each other, destroying our planet, and from space, Earth looked like a junkyard. I mean, if I were in their shoes, I'd turn around and run.
That's your quarantine. That's quarantine theory.
I wanted to add to that interesting comment. I forget the name. But he said we are looking for us. I think we are looking for us not just in the biological sense, but also in the social sense. If you look through history, you see Columbus, when looking for something, he had a reason. You had Genghis Khan going out looking for something because he had a reason. You had Alexander going out and looking for something because he had a reason. But by the same token, if you looked at India as the subcontinent, they didn't go out looking for something. They as a culture remained contained within that subcontinent. One side was the Himalayas, the other side was the Hindu Kush. Take, for that matter, the Chinese. Marco Polo went to China. Marco Polo didn't go from China to. So I think it's the same attitude. And I think we are a little arrogant about it. And I think it's more of a Western way of thinking about it than being an Eastern way of thinking. I'm just throwing something out there, open for discussion.
Raj, remember last night at the party we were discussing this. Remember in the year 1310 or so, the Chinese burned their ships in an act of political will because the emperor lost the struggle with the Mandarins. And just 50 years later, which is nothing in the span of time, the Portuguese showed up in Chinese harbors. It could have been the other way around. I'm sure the Chinese are still mad about that.
Well, they'll make it up for lost time.
And the interesting point in this is that it's not like India was not scientifically advanced. India, that's where most of this math had developed there. You had Aryabhatta, you had Brahmaputra, and you had all these great mathematicians who have contributed to what we have today. So, I don't know how that goes.
We've only got a couple of minutes, guys. Let me take one last question.
I presume somebody's already done this calculation, but let me just ask it here anyway. What's your, I mean, they're what, 10 billion years old? Is that a
13,
reasonable
14.
Reasonable start? Okay. And let's be very generous. Let's be very generous and says that civilizations can last 1 million years. Now history doesn't say they last that long, but we haven't been.
Our history doesn't, but
okay,
that's the data.
Right there, that's 1 in 10 to the -4. So the question you say is, okay, how far out do you have to go to get 10 to the 4th planets that might be habitable? And does that go out far enough that the radio signals won't go out and won't come back that far? I don't know. That's presumably a question that's already been calculated.
The estimate was already done in this book, the conference in Yerevan, the Soviet Union, about 40 years ago. And their estimate of the Drake equation was that there were 10 civilizations in the galaxy, plus or minus an order of magnitude, so between 1 and 100, and that the average separation was 10,000 light years. So,
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
And
even if everybody's out there,
planets is greater.
and I guess the other part of it, since you're that far apart.
On the other hand, and he's working on this, some of those terms in the Drake equation are getting pushed toward or as close to 1.0 as you can get.
Except the last two.
Yeah, well.
The last two have such big error bars.
Can I say something mathematical? I'm
Go for it.
mathematician.
That's why I wanted you on 10.
Okay, what I did and friend Drake knows about that, so I'm not lacking respect to friend Drake. Actually, I think he likes that. Was to extend the Drake equation mathematically. Meaning that instead of having 7 or more factors that are just sheer numbers, positive numbers, I investigated mathematically what is going to happen if we replace each of them by a probability distribution. Now this thing I call the statistical Drake equation, because that is what it is. So imagine that on the right-hand side of the Drake equation you have as many as you wish probability distributions, that is probability densities, that are multiplied again in between, right? Then you can take a very good step, that is, you take the logs of both sides. So on the left you have the log of capital N, and on the right the log of the products. But the log of the products equals the sum of the logs. So you have changed the Drake equation from a product into a sum, which is much easier to handle from the statistical point of view. Now, if you take a course in just ordinary statistics, you stumble into a theorem called the central limit theorem that says, in loose terms, of course, if you have a very large sum of random variables, each of which can be even arbitrarily distributed. So I'm not assuming anything about each of them. But if you assume that the sum increases, that is, it tends to infinity, the number of terms in the sum tends to infinity, then the overall sum approaches the normal distribution, the Gaussian distribution.
A bell curve.
Yes, a bell curve, exactly, thank you. So, having understood this, at this point you have log of n equals a Gaussian. There is just one more step, and the problem is solved. You invert that, and you find out the distribution of n. Now this step was done for the first time around 1870 by the British statistician Sir Francis Galton. And they discovered a new probability distribution that nowadays is called log normal. So this is the conclusion of the story. Capital N, the number of extraterrestrial civilization in the galaxy, is not a sheer number. It is a log normal distribution, whose mean value is the sum of the mean values of all the other distribution on the other side, and whose variance is the sum of the variances. Now this is a step ahead that was not done in the last 50 years. Let me be frank, please. Sorry if I'm telling you the truth, but I came to discover this after 10 years of silly thought. And the conclusion was that I was sure that someone else had reached the same conclusion already. So I went on the web and I searched for any papers about that. There was no paper about that. So then finally I said, okay, I'm going to waste my reputation, but I'm going to the SETI Institute and present that in front of Fred Ray, Jill Tarter, Paul Davis, and all the other top people in the SETI business. Well, that was a new thing. So if you look in the web, there is a paper of mine in Acta Astronautica called the Statistical Drake Equation, and you derive all the conclusions of that. Now that, in my opinion, is a step ahead, because you lose this sheer number stupid attitude and replace them with a probability distribution, that is a mean value and the standard deviation of each side, which is certainly more scientific than just throwing out numbers in a lottery. Okay? Now, for instance, in the first factor, which is the number of stars in the galaxy, nobody knows exactly how many stars there are in the galaxy. It's ridiculous to say any number. You say a distribution that has a mean value of 200 billions, for instance, plus or minus 100 billion. Fine, that's fair. Now, if you do that, the conclusion is very simple, that you increase the probability of finding extraterrestrial just by changing or improving the mathematics, not touching any hypothesis of any other kind. And Frank Drake likes that. And frankly, I would suggest, and I am looking towards the Oak Ridge people, to write down a big code that I'm not able to do, taking into account, as long as we know more about each factors, this result, so that certainly we will not come out with a precise answer, but certainly we'll know more than we have been knowing in the past. Thank you.
And on that note, I hope you've enjoyed it. We're going to